2023 to be a year of significant declines in inflation, and it's actually our job to make sure that that's the case. But I would tell you that, with inflation...
Hello, welcome to Financial Stockholm. I'm Christopher Crystal. Today is Monday, February 13th, 2023. And so for Europe and the US and other parts of the world, this is the day before Valentine. What was on the heart of many Swedes this weekend was really more a focus on external as opposed to what's happening. And this morning we got an announcement from our finance minister, Elisabeth Svantesson, that Sweden is the worst of the EU countries. Of the 27 countries, we have the worst economy. And you really have to look at this and wonder to yourself, okay, why would we be at the worst level? Why would we be the worst? We did the least amount of lockdown, so our economy should have done very well. We produce roughly 1.5 times our energy need in terms of electricity. And yet here we are, we're paying the highest electricity prices. So we agreed to a grid system that we sell our electricity to the rest of Europe, and yet we're paying for it the highest level despite having produced it. This is really food for thought. Is it because we're a right-led government? Because they're not right-wing. Is it because we didn't do the lockdown? I really don't know, but we are in a real problem, and we don't have the energy in the rest of Europe to live a decent life. We have had a number of people going homeless. We're over 30,000, I think, at this point, of people that are homeless in Sweden, and there will be more by the end of the year. I think you will have closer to 100,000 that will be homeless. And it's really scary times. You've had politicians reading letters. Now these politicians are, of course, on the crazy side. They're the right-wing neo-Nazi side, so they don't get much attention. But the fact is that there are things like this happening where people are committing suicide because they can't afford their the bills. And you have people who are being thrown out of their homes because of the electricity, their savings being eaten up. Now, markets are still trending up, and this is trending up not on fundamentals but on perception. And so if you're a Frankfurt School of Economics and you're buying into this modern market, modern monetary theory, sure, this is great. The ECB, the local Fed banks like the Swedbank, or not Swedbank, but the Sverige Riksbank, is raising rates at a slow enough rate to keep the economy growing, and you can keep the lending going. Sure, if you're looking at it from an Austrian school of economics like von Mises or Hayek, you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, like, fundamentally, there's no reason to buy the markets. It's really very strange. But what everybody's basing it on is the rate of inflation. So globally, inflation is growing at something like 6.8 as opposed to 9. So the US is excited and Europe is excited, and global trade is picking up, China. So these are reasons for why the market can grow, because it's growing just fast enough. And you see things like Russia cutting back on its oil production as a way to say, hey, forget about your sanctions. You want to pay cheaper rates? Well, good luck with that. Don't forget, Russia has purchased, they're a net gold buyer for the last 2 years and longer, I think. And they've encouraged their citizens to be net gold buyers. And China is currently a net gold buyer. India, of course, they're generally a gold buyer, but that, people say that's because of their fondness for jewelry for weddings. But really, I think it has to do more with their currency. And when you look at what's happening there, you see a lot of people buying gold, and they claim it's for the jewelry for the weddings, but I think I think that's too simple an answer. So what else is happening in Sweden? Well, our healthcare system is starting to enough qualified personnel to really handle the system. And despite the fact that we pay a lot of tax to have this system, we're seeing where you have people now, the government in Stockholm and the current government is saying, well, hey, look, if you need an interpreter for your medical visit, you should pay for this. You should pay 500 crowns, the rough equivalent of, say, 50 euros or $50 would be paid by the patient who needs an interpreter. And so what that means is that these new languages that have come to Sweden, where you haven't had 20 years of a immigrant experience, where you've had enough people who have come in and been educated in the Swedish system, they need an interpreter to translate into their language. So it's unusual because, I mean, over 90% of the population here speaks Swedish and English. Interpreter means you're speaking a language that maybe comes from a region of the world where they're not speaking any European language or even English, and so therefore you would need an interpreter. And this is a interesting development that you would need an interpreter. But I think really, Sweden is in the midst of a real kind of crisis. We've talked about the energy and what the energy grid is, and what's happening there and why they're not building more. Because if Europe is going to regain its if Europe is actually going to be relevant, it needs to build out its energy grid. It needs to build out its manufacturing. And over the weekend, you saw in the paper that more and more countries are turning back to China for the manufacturing. You're also seeing data, and that's because the energy grid is being built out there in China and India. Whether it's coal or nuclear, they're building it. So they're building the power they need to manufacture. A few weeks back, we had a very interesting article talking about the mineral finds of rare earths here in Sweden. And that's going to take 15 years. I've been asking, okay, why haven't we seen more about it? Well, according to the Wall Street Journal, who did a little investigative reporting, it's going to take 15 years, according to people they've talked to. So even though we have it in our mining town, and it's LKAB, which is owned by the government and is actively involved in mining, it will be 15 years before it's further developed. So even though these rare earths can be used, it's not going to be developed for any time. But if you look at a company like Tesla, there were interesting statements about Tesla and continue to develop with lithium, or would it goes to something like a sodium ion, and who they're using for their batteries in China is really the largest and most advanced battery producer in the world right now, and very, very hard to compete with. And they're doing sodium ion. So even with these rare earths, how relevant will those be in 15 years? I don't know. So one of the other things that we focused on over the weekend was Sweden looks at the U.S. and says, well, hey, look at those balloons. And the U.S. and China are in the midst of discussions about, what is the purpose of the balloons. And one of the things that the balloons are clearly used for is detection. How fast are they detected? So the question then becomes, how many have been floating over Europe? And China has said today and yesterday that the United States and other countries have floated up balloons and sent them over China. We'll have to see. But yet, if you look at the trade figures, you have roughly 700 billion in trade between China and the United States. Europe trades more with China than the United States, but 150 goes from US to China, 550 goes from China to the US. So US is losing the trade war, very similar in Europe as well. But Europe is a smaller economy of 14.5 trillion. But think about that. It's a smaller economy than the United States, 14.5 trillion, but it's trading more with China than the United States. Although you have population of equal size, you have a greater economy in the US. It is roughly higher leverage, but European economies overall are roughly the same leverage as the United States. This is part of the reason why the ECB and the Fed and so forth are doing this rate hike cycle, because they're doing it in line. They're roughly the same size. So they'd say it's development. It's another reason why I say this is a market of perception as opposed to a market of fundamentals. fundamentally the market would be down, but of perception, the rate cycle is why I think you'll see a positive, I believe you'll see a positive rate cycle until June. And, that's why I think the market will continue upwards. You did have a press conference today from Sweden, where we had the Polish Prime Minister in Sweden talking about Sweden and Poland working together, and Sweden joining NATO and Finland joining NATO. And we talked a little bit about the 100,000 jobs between Sweden and Poland, and the 500 different companies that are generating these 100,000 jobs. We're also talking a little bit about nuclear power, because don't forget, Poland believes in nuclear power as well. They're going to build 2 nuclear plants. Sweden's going to hopefully build 3. But if you think about this market fundamentals and you think about this option, the people that I speak to are in agreement, or many have my bias that this is a fundamentally you don't want to own the market, but perception wise you could own the market and get away with it. And if you think about the multiple expansions, you look at the industrials, what are they really producing? What are they producing in Europe, and what are they growing at? And why would you have such a high multiple? And if you look at the recovery rate from October to now, you look at technology companies that have been laying off people, you look at industrials and service economy companies, and what they've gone down to and then recovered to, you see 50% margin or multiple expansions in their figures. And then if you start to drill down across the sectors and you look at these companies, you say to yourself, well, why would a technology company grow or get that same sort of market expansion multiple that a service company is getting? And if you look at the employment data and you look at where these companies were hiring, you have to wonder and say to yourself, why would these companies that don't show any real growth, and if you use a company like Vestas Vind, which is a Scandinavian, it's a Danish company, and you look at their multiples and you look at their revenues and you look at what happened to them and they're cutting their dividends, this is a story where you have to wonder, is it really fundamentally that good a company? Why would I want to invest in this technology? Why would I want to buy these products? And yet, here we go in Sweden, and what's going to grow for the energy? Well, these companies. But where do you see the real growth coming? Well, you look at ExxonMobil, you look at British Petroleum, they're paying strong dividends. They're not even exploring at this point, but now they're returning to exploration. And these companies have had the same sort of return in the market as you've had in the technology companies, as you've had in these companies that have no real fundamentals. So that's why I say it's more a market of perception as opposed to fundamental. If you look at the fundamentals like the oils, well, there you go. You have your base case for why you want to own them. But if you look at these other companies, you don't really see the fundamentals, but you will have the market perceived positivity, and that's why you'll get a positive return. So some people will blame it on short covering, but I think really what you're seeing now through till June will be a perception of how the central banks will be raising rates and how the market will be allowed to appreciate with this cycle. And so even though you have an economy like Sweden, which should be getting the benefits of doing the best for the pandemic and actually producing energy, is unfortunately suffering the most of Europe, and our economy will suffer the most. Why you want to be involved in the market, but at the same time you want to be careful about the names that you're buying. And you can play these different names that are perceived as opposed to the fundamentals. But to really reinforce your portfolio, maybe you want to look at the fundamentals and take strong decisions there. Speak to your advisor, get your investment advice from your advisor, and figure out how you want to structure your portfolio that way. Hopefully you like and you're subscribed. And with that, I'll wish you a great day, and we'll come back to you on Valentine's Day, hopefully with some more goodies from the market. Thank you.